Hello, year 8, and welcome to this week's recorded lesson for history. Today we're going to be covering how did the Commonwealth support Britain during World War II. Okay, so can you write the date, whatever date it is when you're doing this lesson, and the title, how did the Commonwealth support Britain during World War II? We're going to look at loads of historical sources today and understand what it was like for members of the Commonwealth fighting for Britain. We're going to look at the sort of work they were carrying out during the war, to understand why people in the Commonwealth joined the British Army to fight alongside them, and to reach a judgment on how well different races were received and treated during the war by white people from Britain. Okay, so quick date and title, write it down in your books, and then we'll make a start. First things first, we need to understand what the British Commonwealth actually is. Some of you may already know, some of you may not, so I'm going to quickly go through what the Commonwealth is and what it does. So the Commonwealth of Nations is a worldwide political organisation of now independent nations, all of which recognise the British monarch as the head of Commonwealth or their head of state. Okay, so it's an organisation of independent nations, which mean they look after themselves and they're in charge of themselves, all of which recognise British monarch, which is Queen Elizabeth, as their head of state. Okay, the origins of the Commonwealth lie in the British Empire. So after World War II, many former British colonies became independent but kept ties with Britain. Okay, so Commonwealth nations are countries that were in the British Empire when that used to be a thing, and they recognise Queen Elizabeth as their head of state. Many of them became independent after the war. Countries like India were allowed to rule themselves after the war, so they would be an example of a Commonwealth country. I just gave you the example of India as being a Commonwealth country, as it was a country that was previously owned by the British Empire and is now independent. As you can see on this map, take a little time to have a look through it and familiarise yourself with the Commonwealth countries. All the Commonwealth countries that used to be owned by Britain are in green. So as you can see there in Asia, there's India and Pakistan. Down in the bottom right of the screen is Australia and New Zealand. They used to be a part of the British Empire and they still have the Queen as their head of state to this day. You can see in Africa, countries like Nigeria, Kenya, South Africa, Namibia, for example. And then over at the top left of the screen, countries like Canada as well. So you can see the British Empire and the Commonwealth spreads over a vast part of the world and includes many different types of people of different races, religions, and so on. Okay, so it's a very, very big thing, the Commonwealth. And people from all over these countries came to fight alongside Britain during the Second World War to help them out. Have a little look in the map. If you want to pause the video just to have a little look longer at it, then go ahead and do that. Right guys, first task of today's lesson, we're going to have a look at why people from the Commonwealth and the Commonwealth countries decided to support Britain in the war and join the army to fight alongside Britain. Okay, so over the next couple of slides, you're going to see a collection of sources of people from Commonwealth countries talking about why they decided to support Britain and join the war. Okay, so these sources are going to be things that people from India, from Australia, from Africa said, and reasons they gave for joining the army. So what I'd like you to do is to create a mind map and put all the reasons that you can find that people joined the war around that mind map. Okay, so just pop the video on pause now, draw out that mind map, and be ready to read the sources on the next few slides to find the reasons why people might have joined the army in the Commonwealth to help Britain out. Okay. Right guys, these are the first three sources that I've put up on the screen here for you to study. I'll read the first one with you just so you get an idea of what you're doing. Okay, so source number one was a woman called Odessa Gittins, who was a black woman from the Caribbean, recalling the reasons why she signed up to help the military effort for Britain during the Second World War. Okay, she said, "I heard that they were recruiting people for the army. Besides my love for Britain, I wanted to further my studies and I was not able to pursue courses which you had to pay for. I thought this was a good opportunity to do my duty to Britain and to myself." Okay, so what Odessa Gittins is saying is that she joined the army because she wanted to further her studies and she wasn't able to at home because she couldn't afford it. So that would be the first reason on your mind map, to further my education. So that would be one reason why people signed up for the army and travelled to Britain. Okay, so read through the other two sources on the slide, find any other reasons that you can see why people joined the army and put them around your mind map. So pop the video on pause here to read through those sources and add every reason that you can think people are saying in these sources why they wanted to join the British Army and help Britain out during the war. Right guys, hopefully you've now had the chance to go through the first three sources and add some reasons why people joined Britain and helped them during the Second World War. Here are 3 more sources that I'd like you to go through. One is a speech by an African man, one's a South African man explaining why he signed up, and the 6th is an Indian man giving his reasons for signing up as well. So read through these 3 sources and continue to add reasons why people joined to fight with the British Army during the Second World War around your mind map, okay? So pause the video here, read through sources 4, 5 and 6 and keep adding reasons to your mind map why people joined to fight Britain. Well done guys for getting to this point and going through those 6 sources. Hopefully by now you should have a full mind map with loads of reasons that people from the Commonwealth joined the army. I'd just like to go through some that I got when I went through the sources. Number 1, some people wanted to go on an adventure to a new country. So some people in the Commonwealth, from whatever country it may be, may want to go to Europe and see what Britain in Europe was like. So they saw joining the army and joining the war as an adventure to go on. Secondly, they love Britain. So some people in the Commonwealth really love Britain, wanted to do their bit to help Britain out and help them in the tricky situation they were in by joining the army. Number 3, some wanted to prove that black people were just as good as white people. Okay, so even more so back then than there is now. There was quite a lot of racism and a lot of people were of the thought that white people were superior to black people. So many of the people from the Caribbean or Africa took this as a chance in the war to prove that black people were just as strong as white people and could hold their own by joining the army and signing up to fight against the Nazis and Hitler, who was quite a racist person. Another reason, they wanted to further their studies in Britain to get a better education. So the chance to come to Britain and stay in Britain potentially after the war meant that people could go to a better school, get a free education and hopefully get themselves better chances in later life by getting good grades and get the chance to get a better job later. They wanted to gain independence for their own country. So some people, particularly people in India, joined the war and joined the effort to fight against Germany and protect Britain because they thought if they did that, then there'd be more chance that Britain would give them independence after the war because they'd worked so hard and been a good friend to Britain during the fight against the Nazis. So Britain would then be kind enough to give them independence afterwards. They wanted to do their duty for Britain, so very similar to Love Britain. They wanted to muck in, help out, and do their service for Britain and make sure that they weren't defeated during the war. And they also worried about what Hitler may do to African people because he was a white supremacist. Okay, so Hitler, being a white supremacist, meant that he thought white people were better than everyone else. In previous lessons, we talked about how Hitler thought the Aryan race was the most superior. So many in Africa who were black were worried what Hitler may do if he wins the war and decides to come down to Africa to take down Africa later on, because they worried that he might actually go on and make life very miserable for black people and actually kill them later down the line. Right, next task then, guys. What we're looking at now is we're moving on from why people wanted to join and fight Britain. We're going to have a look at how they were actually treated once they arrived. Okay, so what was the experience like for members of the Commonwealth, whether it be from Australia, from Africa, from the Caribbean, from India? What was their experience like when they arrived to Britain or arrived in Europe to help out the war effort? Okay, so what I'd like you to do first is draw out this table. Okay, on the one column you're going to have the source, so the sources are going to number from 1 to 6. I'd like you to put in the next column, what can I learn about how people from the Commonwealth were treated? So for each source you would put in what you learn about how they were treated. And then finally, does this source suggest that they were treated fairly, and explain why? Okay, so can you draw the table that you can see on screen there? Just place the video on pause if you need to. Draw that table out and be ready to go through some more sources to decide if we think people were treated fairly or not once they arrived into Britain. Okay? Right guys, hopefully now you've had a chance to get that table down into your books, and hopefully you've left plenty of room to get enough writing in for each one of these sources. Okay, here are the first 4. So the first one is a quote from an Indian pilot, asked about whether he experienced any racism during the war. Okay, number 2 is written by an Indian soldier in 1967. Source number 3 is an African man remembering his sea voyage to Liverpool, so his trip from Africa to Liverpool by boat. And source 4 was written by a modern historian, okay, talking about what some black people might have gone through when they came to Britain. All right, so work through these 4 sources over the next few minutes. In your table, put what you can learn about how Commonwealth people were treated during the war. Okay, so from each source, what can you learn about how they were treated? And then in the final column, Does it show that they were treated fairly or not? And explain why you think that. Okay, so read through these 4 sources and fill in the table that you've put into your books. Okay, pause the video here to read through them in a little bit more detail and pick out the information that you need to fill out your table. Right then guys, next 4 sources. So now you should have 4 sources filled out into your table, and that table should be looking pretty nice and full by now. These are the next 4, okay? So source number 5 is written by a historian, in 1998. Source number 6 is written by Leary Constantine, who was a black international cricketer who worked for the British Ministry of Labour. So have a look what he said. Source number 7 is a black soldier staying in Britain. And source number 8 is another modern historian writing about the treatment received by some black soldiers whilst they lived in Scotland. Okay, so 4 really interesting sources to read there. So pause the video here, read through these sources, decide what you think. What can you learn from each one about how the Commonwealth members were treated, whether they be from Africa or elsewhere? And does it show that they were being treated fairly, yes or no? And explain why. Okay, so pause the video here, read through these sources. What do you think? Fill out your table, and then we'll move on to the final task of today's lesson. So pop the video on pause here and complete it. Right guys, task number 3. Well done to making it to this stage of the lesson. We've gone through lots and lots of sources so far on the members of the Commonwealth and their involvement in the war. So well done for making it to this part of the lesson. Just a little extension task that I would like us now to do is I'd like us to go back, have a little look at all the sources again, and see if we can pick any sources out that showed that race relations may have improved as a result of the war. So have a look through. If you think the source shows that the war actually helped race relations get better, then pick that source out and explain why that source shows that. So go back, select the source that you think shows the war made race relations, so the relationship between black and white people, better, and explain why that source shows that. Okay, once you've done that, then we'll move on to the little last task of the lesson. So pause the video here, go back, have a look at those sources and decide which one you think, or which ones you think, showed that the war improved race relations. Final task then guys, before we end this lesson, just a quick plenary. I've put a statement on the board here that says, overall, World War II changed the lives of people from the British Commonwealth for the better. Okay, what I'd like you to do is write a short paragraph explaining what you think. So do you agree? Do you disagree with that statement? So think back over what we've looked at this lesson. Do we think that World War II and the fact that it made people from all over the Commonwealth come together, do we think that made their lives better? Or do we think that the racism they faced or the bad treatment they faced actually made their lives worse? Okay, so do you agree? Do you disagree? Write a short paragraph explaining what you think into your books. Then once you've done that, guys, you can upload your work to Satchel 1 so we can have a look at it and see how you're getting on. And then you have completed the lesson. So thanks for coming, guys, and I'll see you at the next recorded session for Year 8 History.